Hello, my friend. To fully enjoy this beautiful and soothing story, gently close your lovely eyes, where the ocean learns to whisper. Tonight, as the world outside slowly quiets, allow yourself to settle into a comfortable place. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to solve, and nothing you need to carry for the next little while. This is a gentle story, one that moves as slowly as the tide, as softly as the evening breeze, and as peacefully as a lighthouse watching over a sleeping shore. There is a place along the northeastern coast of America that never appears on crowded travel brochures. Most people hurry past it without ever knowing it exists. The highway curves inland long before reaching the sea, carrying travelers toward larger towns and brighter lights. But if someone chooses the quieter road, the narrow one lined with old maple trees and weathered wooden fences, they will eventually discover a little harbor where life has never learned to rush. Its name is Seabrook Harbor, a small town resting gently between the Atlantic Ocean and low green hills, where fishing boats return before sunset. Neighbors know one another by name, and evenings arrive so quietly that even time itself seems to slow down. No one there counts success by busy calendars. Instead, they measure life by seasons, by the first robin of spring, by the scent of fresh bread drifting from the corner bakery before sunrise, by children laughing near the docks on warm summer evenings, by crimson maple leaves floating across silent streets in autumn, and by the first snowflake landing upon the old wooden pier each winter. It is the kind of place where every sunrise feels familiar, every sunset feels like an old friend, and every wave carries a story that no one is in a hurry to finish. Tonight, the sea is calm. The Atlantic stretches into darkness like a sheet of soft blue silk. Tiny silver reflections shimmer across the water as the moon slowly climbs above the horizon. Far away, a lighthouse stands patiently on a rocky point. Its white tower has watched over generations of sailors. Every few moments, its warm light turns, glowing across the ocean, touching the quiet harbor, then continuing its endless circle into the night. The rhythm never changes. Light, darkness, light again, almost like breathing. The waves answer with their own gentle rhythm, rolling toward shore, touching the rocks, sliding back into the sea, again, and again, and again. Nothing hurried, nothing loud, only the peaceful conversation between water, wind, and stone. Along the harbor sits an old wooden pier. The boards are smooth from decades of footsteps. Fishermen have walked here before dawn for generations. Children have dangled their feet over the edge every summer. Young couples have watched sunsets here. Grandparents have shared quiet conversations beneath countless stars. The pier remembers all of them. Not because wood can truly remember, but because some places quietly keep the feeling of everyone who has ever loved them. Tonight, the pier is empty. A single lantern glows near its entrance. Its golden light spills gently across the weathered boards. Beyond it, several small fishing boats rock slowly with the tide. Their ropes creak softly against the docks. Metal rings tap lightly against wooden posts. Somewhere nearby, a buoy gently rings. A lonely, comforting, bell-like sound drifting through the night air. The town itself has already settled into evening. Windows glow with warm yellow light. Curtains sway gently as cool ocean air slips through open windows. Some families are finishing dinner. Others sit together, reading books. An elderly couple shares tea on a small porch overlooking the harbor. A dog sleeps peacefully beside the front steps. From one chimney, thin curls of smoke rise quietly into the clear night sky. Nothing extraordinary happens here tonight, and perhaps that is exactly what makes this place so extraordinary, because peace is rarely loud. It arrives softly, almost unnoticed, like evening itself. Near the center of town stands a small bakery. Its lights have just been turned off. Earlier this evening, fresh sourdough bread cooled upon wooden shelves. Cinnamon rolls filled the air with sweetness. Apple pies rested beside the window. Tomorrow morning, before the sun rises, the baker will return. He has followed the same routine for nearly 30 years. Not because he has to, because it feels right. Across the street sits a tiny bookstore. Its front window displays worn novels, local history books, and handmade journals. Inside, every shelf smells faintly of cedar wood and old paper. The owner always leaves one lamp burning overnight, not for customers, simply because she says every bookstore deserves a little light after dark. No one argues with her. In Seabrook Harbor, people rarely argue over beautiful ideas. Farther uphill stands the town library. It is small, quiet, wrapped in climbing ivy that changes colors with each season. Children gather there after school. Retired neighbors volunteer on weekends. Visitors are always welcomed with a smile that asks for nothing in return. Just beyond the library grows an enormous oak tree. No one knows exactly how old it is. Some say 100 years. Others believe much older. The truth hardly matters. The tree has simply become part of the town's heartbeat. Every spring, it grows new leaves. Every autumn, it lets them go without complaint, as though quietly reminding everyone that letting go is simply another way life continues. The sea breeze drifts through the empty streets. It carries the scent of salt, pine trees, fresh earth, and distant rain that may not arrive until tomorrow. Somewhere above, stars begin appearing one by one, not all at once, slowly, patiently, as though the sky itself understands there is no reason to hurry. On nights like this, many people imagine nothing ever changes here, but even the calmest places welcome new beginnings. Sometimes, a stranger arrives, carrying memories too heavy for busy cities. Sometimes, life quietly opens another chapter without announcing it. Tonight, somewhere beyond the last curve of the coastal highway, a single car is making its way toward Seabrook Harbor. Its headlights sweep gently across quiet pine forests, past weathered fences, past sleeping farms, past fields where tall grass dances beneath the moonlight. Inside the car, a man drives without rushing. His name is Ethan Brooks. He is 67 years old. His hair has turned silver over the years. His hands still carry the careful strength of someone who spent a lifetime shaping wood into tables, rocking chairs, and bookshelves. He has never been famous, never wealthy, never someone whose name appeared in newspapers, but he has built thousands of things that quietly became part of other people's lives. Dining tables where families shared birthdays, cribs where babies slept, benches placed beneath old trees, bookshelves filled with stories. Sometimes, the greatest lives are measured not by recognition, but by the quiet comfort they leave behind. Tonight, for the first time in many years, Ethan has nowhere he needs to be tomorrow morning. No workshop waiting, no deadlines, no schedules. Only a small white house he has recently purchased near a harbor he has never truly known. He doesn't yet realize that this peaceful town will gently change the rhythm of his life, not through great adventures, not through dramatic events, but through ordinary mornings, quiet conversations, gentle friendships, and countless small moments that most of the world has forgotten to notice. The road begins to slope downward. Beyond the trees, the first faint shimmer of moonlight appears upon the ocean. Ethan eases his foot from the accelerator, not because the road demands it, but because something about that distant silver water invites him to slow down. Far ahead, the lighthouse completes another calm circle of light. Its gentle beam reaches across the sea, across the harbor, across the quiet streets, and for just a fleeting moment, across the windshield of Ethan's old blue station wagon. He smiles, only slightly, almost without realizing it. The waves continue whispering to the shore. The lighthouse continues, keeping its patient watch. And somewhere deep within the quiet heart of Seabrook Harbor, a new story is about to begin. The lighthouse continued its slow, patient circle across the sleeping sea. Its warm beam slipped gently over the quiet harbor, brushed against the weathered docks, and faded once more into the darkness beyond the horizon. Ethan Brooks rested both hands comfortably on the steering wheel as his old blue station wagon rolled down the final stretch of the coastal road. The road curved gently to the left. Then, almost without warning, the town revealed itself. Not with bright city lights, not with towering buildings, but with something far quieter. A collection of small homes nestled beneath old maple trees, front porches softly glowing beneath warm porch lamps, white picket fences, flower gardens resting peacefully beneath the moonlight, and beyond every rooftop, the endless Atlantic Ocean breathing slowly beneath the stars. Ethan lowered the driver's side window. Cool ocean air drifted inside. It carried the unmistakable scent of salt water, mixed with pine trees, fresh earth, and faint traces of cedar from the nearby forest. He closed his eyes for just a brief second at a stop sign, then smiled again. This place smelled different, not unfamiliar, simply unhurried. The streets were nearly empty. Only a single pickup truck passed in the opposite direction. Its driver lifted 2 fingers from the steering wheel in a quiet greeting. Ethan returned the gesture instinctively. He hadn't spoken a single word. Yet somehow, he already felt welcomed. The town clock struck 9. Its gentle bell echoed softly across the harbor. 1, 2, 3, until the final chime slowly disappeared into the rhythm of the waves. The GPS announced, "Your destination is ahead on the right." Ethan slowed even more. A narrow gravel driveway appeared beside a weathered white mailbox. The black letters painted across its side read simply, "Brooks." Someone from the local real estate office had already placed his name there earlier that afternoon. Seeing it now, under the quiet glow of the porch light, made everything feel unexpectedly real. He turned into the driveway. The tires crunched softly over the pale gravel. Ahead stood a modest white cottage with pale blue shutters and a wide wooden porch. Nothing about the house was grand. It wasn't large. It wasn't modern. It wasn't perfect. And perhaps that was exactly why Ethan loved it the moment he saw it. A single porch swing moved gently in the evening breeze. Not enough to sway, just enough to remind anyone watching that the wind had arrived before they had. Beside the porch stood an old maple tree. Its branches stretched protectively over the roof, like quiet arms welcoming someone home. Near the back of the property, he could hear the ocean, not see it, just hear it. The waves were close enough to whisper, yet far enough away to remain gentle. Exactly the kind of sound Ethan had hoped would fill his evenings. He switched off the engine. Silence settled around him. Not the empty silence of loneliness, the comforting silence that only peaceful places seem to understand. For several moments, he remained seated. There was no reason to hurry. After 43 years of schedules, deadlines, deliveries, appointments, tomorrow would arrive whether he rushed toward it or not. For the first time in decades, no clock was waiting for him. No customer expected a finished table. No telephone would ring before breakfast. Only the sound of the sea. Steady. Patient. Unchanging. Ethan stepped out of the car. The cool night air wrapped gently around him. He looked upward. The stars seemed brighter here than they had in the city. Perhaps they weren't. Perhaps the sky simply had fewer distractions. He walked slowly toward the porch. Each wooden step answered beneath his boots with a soft, familiar creak. Not an unpleasant sound. The kind that reminds you a house has lived a long life. He reached into his coat pocket and found the brass key the realtor had handed him that afternoon. The key was slightly worn, cool against his fingertips. He paused before unlocking the door. Not because he was uncertain, but because he understood something quietly important. Some doors mark the beginning of a different life. This was one of them. With a gentle turn, the old lock clicked open. The front door eased inward. Warm amber light spilled across polished wooden floors. Someone had thoughtfully left a small lamp glowing beside the fireplace. The living room smelled faintly of pine wood, fresh paint, and old cedar beams hidden somewhere above the ceiling. A woven blanket rested neatly across a rocking chair. Bookshelves waited empty. The fireplace stood silent. The kitchen window looked toward the sea. Everything was simple. Everything was calm. And somehow, everything already felt like home. Ethan carried only one small overnight bag inside. The larger boxes could wait until morning. Tonight, there was nothing left to unpack except the quiet. He walked to the kitchen window. Beyond the glass, the lighthouse completed another slow circle across the water. Its beam drifted over the waves like an old friend, saying, "Welcome home." Ethan whispered only 4 words. So, this is home. And for the first time in many years, those words felt completely true. The words lingered softly in the quiet room. So, this is home. Ethan stood by the kitchen window for another moment, watching the lighthouse complete one more slow circle across the dark Atlantic. Its warm beam drifted over the sleeping water, brushed the rooftops of Seabrook Harbor, and disappeared into the night beyond. Nothing seemed to ask anything of him. No unfinished work, no ringing telephone, no schedule waiting on the kitchen counter. Only silence. Gentle, comforting, and wonderfully complete. A tired smile settled across his face. He switched off the small lamp beside the fireplace, leaving only the pale moonlight pouring through the windows. The house became even quieter. Somewhere outside, the waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. A cool breeze slipped through the slightly open bedroom window, carrying the scent of salt water and pine. It felt like nature itself was whispering a simple promise. Tomorrow can wait. Ethan placed his overnight bag beside the bed, folded his jacket neatly over the chair, and, without unpacking another single thing, climbed beneath the soft quilt. The mattress was unfamiliar. The room was unfamiliar. Yet, for reasons he couldn't quite explain, nothing felt strange. The gentle rhythm of the ocean became his lullaby. Before long, sleep found him. Night slowly gave way to morning. Not suddenly, but in the quiet, patient way mornings arrive beside the sea. Long before the sun rose above the horizon, the sky began to soften from deep navy blue into gentle shades of grey. The stars faded one by one. Far out on the Atlantic, the first hint of silver appeared, where the water met the sky. Then, a single seabird called into the dawn. Another answered. Soon the harbour awakened in the same peaceful rhythm it had followed for generations. Fishing boats rocked gently against their moorings. Their ropes creaked softly with the tide. Somewhere nearby, a buoy rang its familiar bell. The sound drifted across the calm water like a slow heartbeat. Inside the little white house, sunlight quietly reached across the bedroom floor. It touched the edge of the quilt, then the wooden chair. Finally, it warmed Ethan's closed eyes. He opened them slowly. For just a moment, he forgot where he was. The ceiling above him was different. The room was brighter. The air smelled of cedar instead of city streets. Then he remembered. Seabrook Harbor, his new home. A quiet laugh escaped him. There was no alarm clock, no rush, no reason to hurry out of bed. He simply listened. The distant waves, bird song, the whisper of leaves outside. It was amazing how many sounds could exist inside true silence. After a few peaceful minutes, Ethan rose from bed and opened the bedroom window a little wider. Fresh ocean air filled the room immediately. Cool, clean, alive. He breathed deeply. For years, mornings had smelled of sawdust from his workshop. He had loved that smell. It had been the scent of honest work. But this was different. This smelled like beginning again. A kettle soon rested upon the small kitchen stove. The familiar whistle slowly filled the house. Ethan smiled. Some routines were worth carrying into every new chapter of life. He prepared a simple breakfast. Toast, a little butter, fresh blackberry jam he had bought on the drive into town, and a steaming mug of dark coffee. He carried everything onto the front porch. The old porch swing greeted him with a gentle creak as he settled into it. Before him, the town was slowly waking. Across the street, an elderly woman watered bright yellow flowers growing beneath her porch. She noticed Ethan almost immediately. With an easy smile, she raised one hand. "Good morning?" Her voice carried warmly through the crisp air. "Good morning," Ethan replied. "You must be the new neighbor." "I suppose I am." She laughed softly. "We've been expecting you. Where the ocean learns to whisper. Tonight, as the world outside slowly quiets, allow yourself to settle into a comfortable place. There is nowhere you need to be, nothing you need to solve, and nothing you need to carry for the next little while. This is a gentle story, one that moves as slowly as the tide, as softly as the evening breeze, and as peacefully as a lighthouse watching over a sleeping shore. There is a place along the northeastern coast of America that never appears on crowded travel brochures. Most people hurry past it without ever knowing it exists. The highway curves inland long before reaching the sea, carrying travelers toward larger towns and brighter lights. But if someone chooses the quieter road, the narrow one lined with old maple trees and weathered wooden fences, they will eventually discover a little harbor where life has never learned to rush. Its name is Seabrook Harbor, a small town resting gently between the Atlantic Ocean and low green hills, where fishing boats return before sunset. Neighbors know one another by name, and evenings arrive so quietly that even time itself seems to slow down. No one there counts success by busy calendars. Instead, they measure life by seasons, by the first robin of spring, by the scent of fresh bread drifting from the corner bakery before sunrise, by children laughing near the docks on warm summer evenings, by crimson maple leaves floating across silent streets in autumn, and by the first snowflake landing upon the old wooden pier each winter. It is the kind of place where every sunrise feels familiar, every sunset feels like an old friend, and every wave carries a story that no one is in a hurry to finish. Tonight the sea is calm. The Atlantic stretches into darkness like a sheet of soft blue silk. Tiny silver reflections shimmer across the water as the moon slowly climbs above the horizon. Far away, a lighthouse stands patiently on a rocky point. Its white tower has watched over generations of sailors. Every few moments its warm light turns, glowing across the ocean, touching the quiet harbor, then continuing its endless circle into the night. The rhythm never changes. Light, darkness, light again, almost like breathing. The waves answer with their own gentle rhythm, rolling toward shore, touching the rocks, sliding back into the sea, again, and again, and again. Nothing hurried, nothing loud. Ethan smiled gently and began walking toward it, unaware that this simple bench and the quiet conversations it would soon witness would become one of the most meaningful places in his new life. Ethan smiled gently and continued walking toward the old wooden bench. The weathered planks of the pier answered each step with a soft, familiar creak, as though they had welcomed countless visitors before him. Above, a pair of seagulls drifted lazily on the morning breeze, their wings barely moving as the wind carried them over the harbor. The bench stood exactly where the pier widened toward its end. It was simple, strong, unassuming. Its once white paint had faded into gentle shades of gray, worn smooth by years of salty air, bright summer sunshine, autumn rain, and quiet winter snow. Someone had cared for it, not by making it look new, but by allowing it to grow old with dignity. Ethan reached out and rested his fingertips along the backrest. The wood felt cool beneath his hand. He brushed away a single maple leaf that had settled there during the night before sitting down. For a long moment, he did nothing. He simply looked. The Atlantic stretched endlessly before him. The morning sun rested low above the horizon, painting the water with ribbons of gold and silver. Small fishing boats glided quietly across the calm sea, leaving long, gentle trails that slowly disappeared behind them. Closer to shore, lobster buoys floated peacefully with the tide, rising and falling almost as though they were breathing. The lighthouse, standing faithfully upon its rocky point, completed another slow circle of light before switching off its beacon for the day. Night had given way to morning, and its work was finished until evening returned. Even in daylight, it seemed to watch over the harbor, not because it had to, because it belonged here, just as the ocean did, just as the gulls did, just as this quiet bench seemed to belong to the rhythm of every passing season. Time slipped gently forward. Without noticing it, Ethan finished the last sip of the coffee he had carried from home. The warmth lingered pleasantly against the cool ocean air. A fisherman guided his small boat toward the docks. Another waved from a neighboring vessel. Someone laughed softly nearby. Wooden crates were lifted. Fishing nets were folded with practiced hands. Everything happened without urgency. Everyone seemed to know exactly what needed to be done. No one appeared rushed. No one raised their voice. The harbor moved like a well-loved song everyone already knew by heart. Ethan found himself smiling again. He had spent decades believing that life was measured by how much could be finished before sunset. Now, watching this little town, he wondered if life was perhaps measured differently. Maybe. It was measured by how completely one experienced each quiet moment. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and pine across the water. It stirred the collar of Ethan's jacket. Somewhere behind him, footsteps approached. Steady, unhurried. He turned slightly. An older man, perhaps in his early 70s, walked slowly along the pier, carrying a small tackle box in one hand and a weathered fishing rod in the other. He wore a faded navy sweater beneath an old canvas jacket that had clearly accompanied him through many seasons. A grey knit cap rested comfortably upon his silver hair. His face carried deep lines shaped not by worry, but by years spent smiling beneath sun and sea. When he reached the bench, he stopped. "Mind if I share it with you?" His voice was calm and warm. Ethan shifted slightly, leaving plenty of room. "Not at all." The man nodded his thanks before sitting down. For several moments, neither spoke. They simply watched the ocean together. It felt natural, comfortable. The silence between them never became awkward. Instead, it seemed to belong there. And finally, the older man smiled toward the horizon. "Beautiful morning." "It certainly is," Ethan replied. "You new around here?" "I arrived last night." "I thought so." The man chuckled softly. "Small towns notice new faces." Ethan laughed quietly. "I've already discovered that." The older man extended his hand. "My name's Samuel Walker." Ethan Brooks. Their handshake was firm but unhurried, the kind shared between two people with nothing to prove. "Welcome to Seabrook Harbor, Ethan." "Thank you." Samuel looked toward the lighthouse. "You picked a good place." "I hope so." Samuel smiled. "Oh, you did." Another peaceful silence settled over the bench. Far below, gentle waves tapped softly against the wooden pilings beneath the pier. Tap, pause, tap, like the slow ticking of a clock no one needed to watch. Samuel rested both hands upon his fishing rod. "You know," he said after a while, "visitors usually spend their first morning taking photographs." Ethan glanced around. "I forgot to bring my camera." Samuel smiled without looking away from the sea. "Good." Ethan looked at him curiously. "Good?" Samuel nodded. "Some mornings aren't meant to be collected. They're meant to be lived." The words drifted gently into the quiet air. Ethan considered them for a moment. Then he looked back toward the ocean. Perhaps Samuel was right. Some memories became stronger when they remained inside the heart instead of inside a photograph. A small fishing boat eased slowly past the end of the pier. The captain lifted one hand in greeting. Samuel returned the wave. "So," Samuel asked after another peaceful minute, "what brought you all the way here?" Ethan watched the sunlight dance across the waves before answering. I retired. Samuel nodded, as though that explained everything. "And after 43 years building furniture?" Ethan continued. I wanted to find somewhere that didn't ask me to hurry anymore. Samuel smiled. You'll fit in just fine. You think so? I know so. Samuel leaned back against the bench. This town has a way of teaching people something they've forgotten. And what's that? How to notice. Ethan looked at him. Notice what? Samuel's smile grew a little softer. The tide. The birds. The changing seasons. The smell of rain before it arrives. The sound your own thoughts make once the world finally becomes quiet. Ethan followed Samuel's gaze toward the endless sea. For a long while, neither of them spoke again. There simply wasn't any need. The harbor spoke enough for everyone. The church bell rang softly somewhere beyond the rooftops. 10 gentle chimes floated across the town. 10 o'clock. The morning was slipping peacefully toward midday. Samuel slowly stood, brushing a little sawdust-colored sand from his trousers. Well, he said with an easy smile, I promised my granddaughter I'd help her build a birdhouse this afternoon. Ethan's eyes brightened. You build things? Samuel laughed. Not nearly as well as I used to. Ethan smiled. I spent most of my life in a woodworking shop. Samuel paused. His eyebrows lifted. Did you now? I did. Samuel's smile widened. Well, I've got a feeling we'll have plenty to talk about. He picked up his fishing rod. Same bench tomorrow morning? Ethan looked out across the calm Atlantic, then back at Samuel. I'd like that. Samuel tipped his cap. Until tomorrow, then. He walked slowly back along the pier, disappearing into the gentle rhythm of the harbor. Ethan remained on the bench. The breeze stirred softly around him. The waves continued their endless conversation with the shore. And for the first time since arriving, he realized he was no longer simply visiting Seabrook Harbor. Little by little, he was beginning to belong. As the sun climbed a little higher into the clear blue sky, Ethan rose from the bench and made his way back toward the heart of town. The warm scent of fresh bread drifted once again through the air. He smiled. Perhaps, this time, he would stop at the bakery after all. The warm scent of fresh bread drifted through the air once again. Ethan smiled. Perhaps, this time, he would stop at the bakery after all. Leaving the old wooden pier behind, Ethan walked at the same gentle pace that seemed to belong to everyone in Seabrook Harbor. The harbor slowly faded behind him, though its quiet presence never truly disappeared. The cries of seagulls became softer with every step, replaced by another familiar morning melody. The cheerful ringing of a small brass bell. It chimed each time someone opened the bakery door. The sound was light, friendly, almost musical. By the time Ethan reached the corner of Harbor Street, the sweet aroma had become impossible to ignore. Fresh sourdough, warm butter, cinnamon, roasted coffee, and something else. The unmistakable fragrance of apple pie cooling on wooden racks. The bakery itself looked as though it had been standing there forever. Its white-painted brick walls had softened with time. Blue shutters framed the windows. Flower boxes overflowed with cheerful daisies and lavender. Above the entrance hung a weathered wooden sign. Harbor Hearth Bakery. The lettering had faded slightly over the years, but someone had carefully repainted the small, painted loaf of bread beneath the name every spring. Little things mattered here. Even signs. Ethan reached for the brass handle. The small bell above the door welcomed him with a cheerful ring. Immediately, warmth surrounded him, not only from the large brick ovens, but from the room itself. Sunlight poured through the front windows, illuminating rows of fresh bread resting upon wooden shelves. Golden croissants, blueberry muffins, country loaves dusted lightly with flour, sticky cinnamon rolls still glistening with icing, apple turnovers arranged neatly beside homemade blackberry scones. The entire bakery smelled like comfort. Behind the long wooden counter stood the baker Ethan had noticed earlier that morning. He was a broad-shouldered man in his late 50s, wearing a flour-covered apron and a warm smile that seemed as natural as breathing. The moment he recognized Ethan, his face brightened. "Well," he said cheerfully, "I had a feeling you'd be back." Ethan laughed. "You were right." The baker wiped his hands on a clean towel before extending one. "I'm Daniel Foster." Ethan Brooks. "Welcome to Seabrook Harbor, Ethan." "I've heard that several times already." Daniel chuckled. "That's because we mean it." For a few moments, Ethan simply admired the bakery. There were only 6 small wooden tables. A bookshelf filled with well-loved novels stood beside one wall. Fresh flowers rested in simple glass jars on every table. No loud music played overhead. Instead, the room was filled with gentle conversations, the quiet turning of newspaper pages, the soft hiss of the espresso machine, and the comforting sound of neighbors greeting one another by name. An elderly gentleman looked up from his crossword puzzle. "Morning, Daniel." "Morning, George." A young mother helped her daughter choose a blueberry muffin. "Thank you, Mrs. Ellis." "My pleasure, sweetheart." Someone opened the door. The little bell chimed again. Another familiar face entered. No introductions seemed necessary. Everyone already belonged. Daniel leaned slightly across the counter. "So, first morning in town?" Ethan nodded. "My first full day." "And?" Ethan glanced around the bakery, then toward the window, where sunlight shimmered across the harbor beyond. "I think I'm beginning to understand why people stay." Daniel smiled knowingly. "Most of us leave once." "And?" "We usually come back." Daniel reached behind the counter and lifted a warm country loaf from a cooling rack. Steam still escaped gently from its crisp golden crust. Fresh out of the oven, he tore off a small piece, added a little butter, then handed it to Ethan. "No charge. Just a welcome." Ethan accepted it with quiet gratitude. The bread was still warm. Its crust crackled softly. The inside was light, tender, perfectly balanced. He closed his eyes for just a brief moment after the first bite. "That's wonderful." Daniel grinned. "My grandfather started baking here in 1948. My father took over after him. Now it's my turn." Ethan looked around again. "It feels like more than a bakery." Daniel nodded. "It is." He gestured toward the room. "People celebrate birthdays here. They comfort one another after difficult days. They share good news. They read. They laugh. Sometimes, they simply sit quietly with a cup of coffee. We don't sell bread. We help people slow down." The words stayed with Ethan. Perhaps that explained why the room felt different. No one looked at a watch. No one hurried toward the door. Even those sitting alone seemed completely content. Daniel poured a fresh cup of dark coffee. "This one's on the house. I can't let you do that." "You can. It's tradition. For newcomers." Ethan accepted the mug with a grateful smile. The rich aroma rose gently with the steam. Daniel pointed toward the table beside the front window. "Best seat in the bakery. You can watch the harbor while you drink." Ethan settled into the chair. The wooden seat creaked softly beneath him. Outside, the The town continued its peaceful morning rhythm. A postal carrier waved at passing cyclists. Children walked toward the small elementary school, carrying colorful backpacks. A fisherman balanced 2 empty lobster traps across his shoulders, while chatting with a florist sweeping the sidewalk. No one seemed rushed. Everyone seemed present. The church bell rang once in the distance, not to announce an emergency, simply to mark another peaceful hour. As Ethan sipped his coffee, his attention wandered toward the bookshelf near the fireplace. Its shelves held dozens of novels, travel journals, local history books, collections of poetry. One leather-bound journal caught his eye. Its cover was worn smooth with age. A small handwritten note rested beside it. It read, "If a story brings you peace, leave it here for someone else to discover." Ethan smiled. He walked over and gently opened the journal. Inside, visitors had been writing little notes for years. Some were only a few lines. Others filled entire pages. One entry read, "I stopped here during a road trip 22 years ago. I planned to stay one night. Somehow I'm still here." Another simply said, "Thank you for reminding me that mornings don't have to begin with rushing." Ethan turned another page. The handwriting changed with every entry. Different people, different lives. Yet somehow, every message spoke of the same quiet feeling. Peace. He carefully closed the journal and returned it to its place. Perhaps one day, he would leave a few words of his own. But not today. Some stories, he thought, needed a little more time before they were ready to be written. As he finished the last sip of coffee, the bakery door opened once more. The little brass bell rang gently. A cool breeze drifted inside. Ethan looked up. Standing in the doorway was Samuel Walker, carrying a small wooden box under one arm. He spotted Ethan almost immediately, and smiled and smiled. "Well now," Samuel said warmly. "I had a feeling this is where I'd find you." Ethan laughed softly. "I finally followed the smell of fresh bread." Samuel chuckled. "That's how most friendships begin around here." He gently placed the wooden box on Ethan's table. "I was on my way to my granddaughter's house. And then I remembered something." Ethan looked curiously at the beautifully crafted box. "What did you remember?" Samuel rested one weathered hand upon the smooth cedar lid. "I heard you spent your life working with wood." He smiled. "I thought perhaps you might enjoy seeing something that has been waiting many years for the right pair of hands." Ethan's curiosity quietly awakened. Outside, a gentle breeze carried the scent of the sea through the open bakery door. Inside, morning sunlight settled softly across the old cedar box. Whatever rested inside, it carried a story, and Ethan had a feeling that story was about to become part of his own. Whatever rested inside. For a few quiet moments, neither man reached for the box. The bakery around them continued its gentle morning rhythm. Someone laughed softly near the counter. Fresh loaves were placed onto cooling racks. The little brass bell above the front door chimed as another customer stepped inside. Outside, a light breeze stirred the flower boxes beneath the windows. Nothing interrupted the peaceful flow of the morning. Samuel rested both hands lightly upon the smooth cedar lid. His fingers traced the natural grain of the wood, as though greeting an old friend. "Cedar," Ethan said quietly. Samuel looked up with a smile. "You recognized it." "I've worked with enough cedar to know its scent before I even touch it." Samuel chuckled. "I thought you might." He slid the box a little closer. It belonged to my father. Ethan looked at the box again. It wasn't fancy. There were no carved decorations, no polished brass corners, only honest craftsmanship. The edges were joined with careful dovetail joints. Each corner fit together so perfectly that almost no seam could be seen. Whoever had built it had understood patience, the kind of patience that couldn't be rushed. Ethan rested one hand lightly against the lid. The cedar still carried its warm, comforting fragrance, though the box had clearly lived many years. Wood, he thought, had a remarkable way of holding memories. Samuel nodded gently. Go ahead. Ethan lifted the lid. The small brass hinges moved without the slightest complaint. Inside, everything had been arranged with quiet care. A folded linen cloth covered the contents. Its edges had yellowed gently with age. Samuel carefully folded it back. Resting beneath it were several beautifully worn woodworking tools. A wooden marking gauge, a small block plane whose smooth handle had darkened from decades of careful use, a dovetail saw, a few finely sharpened chisels wrapped inside a faded leather roll. None of them looked new. Every one of them looked loved. Ethan picked up the smallest chisel. Its handle fit naturally into his palm, almost instinctively. This has been sharpened hundreds of times, he whispered. Samuel nodded. My father believed a good tool should never become dull. He also believed people shouldn't either. Ethan smiled. I think I would have liked him. Samuel's eyes drifted toward the harbor outside the bakery window. I believe you would have. Beneath the tools rested something else, a rolled piece of heavy drawing paper. Samuel carefully untied the faded cotton string, holding it together. He unrolled it across the table. It was an old, hand-drawn blueprint. The paper had softened with age, its edges slightly curled. Delicate pencil lines covered every corner. Measurements, notes, curved details, carefully written observations. Ethan leaned closer. His eyes widened. It's a bench. Samuel smiled. The very bench we sat on this morning. Ethan looked up in surprise. The one at the end of the pier? Samuel nodded. My father built it. For a long moment, neither spoke. Outside, the tide continued its slow rise against the harbor pilings. Inside, morning sunlight warmed the faded drawing. Samuel traced one finger gently along the edge of the sketch. He built it nearly 40 years ago. Back then, the harbor committee wanted something simple, strong enough to survive every season, comfortable enough that people might stay a while. He always said, Samuel paused with a gentle smile, that a bench isn't built for sitting. It's built for staying. Ethan looked once more toward the harbor. He could almost see the bench from the bakery window, small against the endless sea, yet somehow more important than ever. Samuel continued. My father used to sit there every Thursday morning. He'd watch the boats leave, drink his coffee, and wave to everyone. When he passed away, Samuel's voice remained calm. The bench stayed. So did the habit. I've been sitting there ever since. Ethan understood. Some traditions needed no explanation. They simply became part of a place, part of its heartbeat. Samuel reached once more into the cedar box. This time he lifted out something much smaller, wrapped carefully in soft cloth. He unfolded it slowly. Inside rested a tiny wooden sailboat, no longer than Ethan's hand. It had been carved from maple. Its little mast was walnut. Its sails were made from cream-colored linen. Every tiny detail had been shaped with extraordinary care. Even the anchor had been carved by hand. Ethan turned it gently beneath the sunlight. "It's beautiful," Samuel smiled. "My father carved one every winter, for every grandchild born into the family." Ethan examined the tiny boat more closely. The wood had become wonderfully smooth over the years. "I imagine this one belongs to your granddaughter." Samuel nodded. "It does. Her name is Lily. She's 10, bright as the morning sun, curious about everything. And recently," he laughed softly, "she's decided she'd like to learn woodworking." Ethan smiled. "That's wonderful." Samuel looked thoughtfully toward him. "It is. But there's one small problem." The bakery had grown quieter. Several customers had finished breakfast and wandered back into the peaceful streets. Daniel polished coffee mugs behind the counter while humming an old folk tune. The room seemed even calmer than before. Samuel folded his hands. "I can still build birdhouses. I can still fix fences. But my hands aren't quite as steady as they used to be." He flexed his fingers gently. "The years have a way of reminding us." Ethan nodded with quiet understanding. Samuel looked directly at him. "I was wondering if perhaps," he smiled kindly, "you might be willing to help teach Lily." Ethan blinked. The question settled gently between them. Unexpected, yet strangely natural. He looked down at the old tools, then toward the harbor, then back at Samuel. It had been months since anyone had asked him to build anything. Longer still since anyone had asked him to teach. He had assumed that chapter of his life was finished. Perhaps it wasn't. Perhaps it was simply beginning again. A warm feeling spread quietly through his chest. Not excitement, not surprise. Something softer. Purpose. The kind that arrives without making a sound. He smiled. "I'd be honored." Samuel's weathered face brightened immediately. "I had a feeling you'd say that." Daniel approached, carrying 2 freshly baked cinnamon rolls. He placed them gently on the table. "On the house." Samuel laughed. "Daniel, you'll put yourself out of business giving everything away." Daniel shrugged with a grin. "I've learned something over the years. Kindness has a funny way of finding its way back." The 3 men shared a quiet laugh. Outside, the church bell rang once. Noon had arrived. Sunlight sparkled across the harbor. Children's voices drifted faintly from somewhere near the park. The town continued exactly as it always had. Steady, gentle, unhurried. Samuel carefully returned the tools to the cedar box. "But first," he said with a knowing smile, "before we build anything, I think there's someone I'd like you to meet." Ethan stood, lifting the cedar box with both hands. It was surprisingly light, yet somehow it felt as though he were carrying something far more valuable than wood and old tools. Together, the 2 men stepped out of the bakery into the warm afternoon sunshine. A soft breeze carried the scent of the ocean through Harbor Street. Ahead of them, beyond a row of maple trees, a narrow path curved gently toward a small white cottage where the sound of a child's laughter floated through the open garden gate. Ethan smiled. Without realizing it, his new life had already begun to take shape. The day was slowly turning toward evening, and Ethan had the feeling that tomorrow would bring another quiet surprise. But first, there was still this evening. For a little while, no one moved. The tiny bluebird rested in the center of the maple workbench, where the late afternoon sunlight gently illuminated its smooth pine wings. Lily looked at it with quiet satisfaction. "It isn't perfect," she said softly. Ethan smiled. I hope it never becomes perfect. She tilted her head. Why? He picked up the little bird and turned it gently in his hands. Because perfect things often tell us very little. He traced a finger along one slightly uneven wing. But this tells the story of the afternoon you carved it. It tells us where your hands were careful, where they hesitated, where they grew more confident. And one day, years from now, you'll hold it again and remember today. Lily smiled. So every little mistake becomes part of the story. Ethan nodded. Exactly. Samuel, quietly brushing sawdust from the workbench, looked toward Ethan. My father used to say almost the same thing. Ethan looked up. What did he say? Samuel smiled warmly. He'd say, wood never asks us to be perfect. It only asks us to pay attention. For a few peaceful moments, no one spoke. The words settled gently into the workshop, as quietly as the fine pine dust resting upon the floor. Samuel glanced toward the window. The sun will be setting in about an hour. Lily's eyes brightened. Can we walk to the harbor? Samuel looked at Ethan. What do you think? Ethan smiled. I'd like that very much. Lily carefully wrapped the little bluebird in a soft linen cloth before placing it inside a small wicker basket. I wanted to see the ocean. Samuel laughed. I suppose every bird deserves that. The three of them stepped outside. The workshop door closed with a gentle click behind them. The garden had changed since afternoon. The golden light of late day rested softly across the flowers. Honeybees drifted lazily among the lavender. A butterfly landed briefly on one of the sunflowers before continuing its slow journey through the warm air. Lily paused beside a patch of mint. She gently brushed a few leaves between her fingers. Immediately, their fresh fragrance filled the air. My grandmother always did that, Samuel said. When she walked through the garden, she said every evening should begin with a beautiful smell. Ethan smiled. She sounds like someone who noticed the little things. Samuel nodded. She noticed almost everything. Willow Lane had become even quieter. Most people had finished their work for the day. Front porches slowly filled with neighbors enjoying the cool evening breeze. An elderly couple rocked gently in matching wooden chairs. A little boy drew colorful pictures with sidewalk chalk. A golden retriever stretched lazily beneath the shade of a maple tree. Everyone they passed offered a smile. Some waved. Others simply nodded. No one seemed surprised to see Ethan walking beside Samuel. Word traveled gently in small towns, not through gossip, but through kindness. By evening, nearly everyone already knew the new neighbor's name. As they reached Harbor Street, Daniel was standing outside the bakery, carefully arranging small pots of herbs beneath the front window. He looked up and smiled. Evening, friends. Evening, Daniel, Samuel replied. Daniel noticed the wicker basket Lily carried. What's inside? Lily grinned proudly. My first bluebird. Daniel placed one hand over his heart. Then, tomorrow morning, you'll have to bring it in so everyone can admire it. Lily beamed. I will. Daniel looked toward Ethan. I see you've already been put to work. Ethan chuckled. I don't mind. Good. Daniel smiled. Retirement shouldn't mean stopping. It should mean choosing the work that makes your heart peaceful. Those words stayed with Ethan as they continued walking. The harbor slowly came into view. Evening had transformed it completely. The bright activity of morning had faded into something quieter. Fishing boats had returned. Their nets were neatly folded. The day's catch had long since been unloaded. The water reflected the sky like polished glass. Gentle shades of blue, gold, and pale pink blended together across the calm surface. Far beyond the harbor, the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The lighthouse stood waiting patiently for darkness. Soon, its beacon would begin another night's watch. They stepped onto the old wooden pier. The familiar boards welcomed them with soft creaks beneath their feet. Lily skipped ahead, though not too quickly. Even children seemed to move more gently here. When she reached the old bench, she stopped. "It's empty," Samuel smiled. "It usually is around this time." The three of them settled onto the bench. Lily sat between her grandfather and Ethan. She carefully removed the little bluebird from its cloth and placed it beside her. The tiny carving faced the sea. For a moment, it almost looked alive. The harbor grew quieter still. A pair of sailboats drifted slowly toward their moorings. The breeze carried the faint scent of salt and distant pine forests. Somewhere overhead, gulls circled lazily before returning to their nests among the rocky cliffs. The first evening star appeared high above the western sky. Lily noticed it immediately. "My teacher says sailors used to follow the stars." Samuel nodded. "They still do, sometimes." She looked toward Ethan. "Have you ever been lost?" The question was so simple, yet it carried surprising weight. Ethan remained quiet for a moment, watching the waves, listening to their slow rhythm. Finally, he answered. "Yes." Lily waited patiently. "Where?" Ethan smiled softly. "Not always on a road." She looked puzzled. He continued gently. "Sometimes people become so busy that they forget what makes them feel alive." Samuel quietly lowered his eyes. Lily thought carefully about that. "So, you can be lost, even if you know where you are?" Ethan nodded. "I think so." Another peaceful silence settled around them. The waves answered with their steady whisper against the pier. Lily looked out across the endless Atlantic. "Do you think you've found your way again?" Ethan looked toward the lighthouse. Its lantern suddenly came to life. A warm beam swept gracefully across the sea, then across the harbor, then gently across the old wooden bench. He smiled. This time, his answer came without hesitation. "Yes, I think I'm beginning to." The lighthouse continued its patient circle. Light, darkness, light again. The rhythm felt almost timeless. Lily rested her head lightly against Samuel's shoulder. The little bluebird remained beside her, facing the ocean. Samuel spoke quietly. "You know, my father used to bring me here every Friday evening. We never talked very much. We just watched the sunset." Ethan looked toward him. "Were you ever bored?" Samuel laughed softly. "When I was young, I thought we were doing nothing." He smiled at the memory. "Now I understand. We were doing something very important." "What was that?" Ethan asked. Samuel watched the sun sink slowly toward the horizon. "We were making memories that didn't know they were memories yet." Ethan looked back across the glowing water. Those words settled gently into his heart. Perhaps the most meaningful moments in life rarely announced themselves. Perhaps they arrived quietly, disguised as ordinary evenings, shared with ordinary people, on an ordinary bench, beside an ordinary harbor, and only years later did they reveal how extraordinary they'd always been. The sun slipped below the horizon. The sky deepened into shades of lavender and deep blue. One by one, stars began to appear above Seabrook Harbor. The lighthouse continued watching over them all, and somewhere beyond the quiet streets, The comforting aroma of supper drifted from open kitchen windows, carried gently by the cool evening breeze. Tomorrow would bring another peaceful day, another slow morning, another story waiting to unfold. Tomorrow would bring another peaceful day, another slow morning, another story waiting to unfold. The night settled gently over Seabrook Harbor. The lighthouse continued its quiet circle across the sleeping Atlantic. Its warm light swept over the old wooden pier, across the weathered bench, past the rows of peaceful cottages, before disappearing once more into the darkness beyond the sea. Inside his little white house, Ethan opened the bedroom window before going to bed. The cool evening breeze carried with it the soft rhythm of the waves. Somewhere in the distance, a buoy chimed quietly. The sound came slowly, then faded, then returned again. It reminded him of an old grandfather clock, not one that hurried the hours along, but one that simply kept faithful company through the night. Ethan smiled. He no longer felt like a visitor. The little cottage was already beginning to feel familiar. The floorboards had their own gentle creaks. The kitchen kettle had its own cheerful whistle. Even the porch swing seemed to greet him each morning with the same patient rhythm. Home, he realized, wasn't only a place. It was a collection of familiar sounds. With that comforting thought resting gently in his mind, he closed his eyes, and the sea carried him peacefully into sleep. Morning arrived, wrapped in a veil of pale silver mist. The harbor was quieter than usual. Fog drifted softly across the water, blurring the distant shoreline until the ocean and sky seemed to become one. Only the lighthouse remained clearly visible. Its white tower rose calmly above the mist, like an old friend keeping watch. The beam no longer shone. Instead, the first rays of sunlight slowly painted its stone walls with gentle shades of gold. Ethan stood on his porch, holding a warm mug of coffee. The air felt cool against his face. He breathed deeply. Salt, pine, a hint of damp earth from the night's dew. Everything smelled fresh. Everything felt unhurried. He looked toward the harbor and smiled. Perhaps this morning called for a walk. The streets were still wonderfully quiet. Only a few people were awake. A newspaper delivery bicycle rolled slowly past. Mrs. Margaret was already tending her flowers, humming softly to herself as she watered the roses. She noticed Ethan and waved. "Good morning." "Good morning, Margaret." "Beautiful mist today." "It certainly is." She smiled knowingly. "The harbor looks different every morning. That's why none of us ever grow tired of it." Ethan looked toward the sea again. He believed her. When he reached the harbor, the fog still floated gently above the water. The old wooden pier seemed to disappear into the mist after only a short distance. The familiar bench rested quietly where it always had, still empty, still facing the sea. Ethan considered sitting there. Instead, his eyes wandered farther along the shoreline, toward the lighthouse. A narrow gravel path curved gently around the rocky point leading toward its base. Yesterday he had admired it from afar. Today, something invited him closer. Not curiosity, something quieter, almost like recognition. He followed the path. The lighthouse stood taller than it had appeared from the harbor. Its white stone walls carried the marks of countless storms. Winter winds, salt, rain, time itself. Yet it remained strong, steady, patient. A small garden of wildflowers surrounded its entrance. Purple lupines, white daisies, sea lavender swaying softly in the breeze. Someone clearly cared for this place. Beside the wooden door hung a simple brass plaque. Seabrook Harbor Lighthouse. Established 1894, nothing more, nothing less. As Ethan admired the old tower, the front door opened quietly. An elderly woman stepped outside carrying a small wicker basket filled with gardening tools. She wore a light blue sweater beneath a beige canvas vest, and a wide-brimmed straw hat shaded her silver hair from the morning sun. She looked at Ethan with kind, thoughtful eyes. "You must be Ethan Brooks." He smiled, slightly surprised. "I am." She laughed gently. "I thought so. Small towns," Ethan said. "They notice new faces." She smiled. "We certainly do." She extended her hand. "My name is Grace Holloway. I look after the lighthouse." Ethan shook her hand warmly. "It's a pleasure to meet you." "And you." Grace knelt beside the flower beds, carefully removing a few tiny weeds. She worked slowly, without rushing, without trying to finish quickly. After a few moments, she looked toward Ethan. "Would you mind handing me that little watering can?" "Of course." He passed it to her. She thanked him with a smile. The flowers don't really need much. They just appreciate someone paying attention. Ethan couldn't help smiling. "I've been hearing that quite a lot lately." Grace laughed softly. "Then you've met Samuel." "I have." "He says the town teaches people how to notice." Grace nodded. "He's right." When the flowers had been watered, Grace stood and brushed the soil gently from her gloves. "Would you care to come inside? I've just made a fresh pot of tea." "I'd enjoy that." The inside of the lighthouse felt warm and welcoming. Sunlight filtered through tall windows, filling the circular room with soft golden light. Everything was neat, simple, well cared for. Old nautical charts hung upon the walls. Shelves held books about birds, weather, local history, and the sea. Near one window stood a sturdy wooden desk. Upon it rested a thick, leather-bound journal. Its cover had darkened beautifully with age. Grace noticed Ethan looking at it. "That," she said, with a gentle smile, "has become my favorite morning companion." She carefully lifted the journal and placed it on the table between them. The leather creaked softly as she opened it. The first pages were nearly 40 years old. The handwriting changed from one decade to the next. Some entries filled an entire page. Others contained only a single sentence. Ethan leaned closer. "What is it?" Grace smiled. "A journal, but not the kind most people keep." She turned to a page written many years earlier. The entry simply read, "The first snow arrived before sunrise. The harbor became so quiet that even the gulls seemed unwilling to disturb it." Another page. "A little girl left seashells on the old bench today. She smiled at everyone who passed." Another. "The maple tree beside Harbor Street dropped its final leaf this afternoon. Winter won't be far behind." Ethan slowly turned another page. Every entry described only one small thing. Nothing dramatic, nothing extraordinary, just quiet observations. Little moments, the kind most people hurried past without seeing. Grace smiled. "The first lighthouse keeper began it in 1896. Since then, every keeper has added a little something. Not history, not news, just..." She looked toward the harbor outside the window. Whatever beautiful thing the day quietly offered. Ethan gently closed the journal. "I think that's one of the most wonderful books I've ever seen." Grace nodded. "It reminds me, every single day, that something beautiful always happens. if we remember to look. She walked to a nearby shelf and returned carrying a smaller notebook. Its cover was plain blue cloth. She placed it gently before Ethan. "A gift." He looked surprised. "I couldn't." "You can. I have several." He carefully opened the first page. It was blank, waiting. Grace smiled. "You don't have to write much. Sometimes one sentence is enough." "What should I write?" Grace looked thoughtfully through the lighthouse window. "Whatever made you pause. Maybe the color of the sky, the smell of fresh bread, the sound of the tide, the smile of a stranger. It doesn't matter. What matters is noticing." Ethan rested his hand upon the little notebook. Outside, the fog had almost completely lifted. Sunlight sparkled across the harbor once again. Fishing boats drifted peacefully over the calm water. Somewhere below, the old wooden bench waited faithfully beside the sea. He smiled. Perhaps tomorrow morning he would begin writing. Not because he wanted to remember, but because he wanted to learn how to notice even more deeply. Grace poured 2 cups of warm tea. They carried them outside and stood quietly beside the lighthouse garden. Neither felt the need to speak. The waves spoke enough for both of them. Above the harbor, a gentle breeze carried the scent of salt, wildflowers, and distant pine through the morning air. And as Ethan looked across Seabrook Harbor, he had the quiet feeling that every day here held a lesson. Not a grand lesson, not one that changed the world, just the kind that slowly changed a person's heart. And as Ethan looked across Seabrook Harbor, he had the quiet feeling that every day here held a lesson. Not a grand lesson, not one that changed the world, just the kind that slowly changed a person's heart. For a little while longer, Ethan and Grace remained beside the lighthouse garden. The morning had fully awakened now. The mist had drifted out toward the open Atlantic, revealing a sea that shimmered beneath the gentle sunlight. Wildflowers nodded softly in the breeze. A pair of monarch butterflies floated from one blossom to another, never seeming to hurry. Grace cradled her teacup in both hands. "When I was younger," she said quietly, "I thought the lighthouse existed to guide ships." Ethan looked toward the tall white tower. "And now?" She smiled. "I think it also reminds the people who live here that every day begins with a little light." Neither of them spoke after that. Some thoughts Ethan had begun to learn were complete the moment they were spoken. They didn't need explaining. After thanking Grace for the tea and the little blue notebook, Ethan began walking back toward town. He slipped the notebook carefully into the inside pocket of his jacket. He found himself touching it from time to time, just to make sure it was still there. Not because he was afraid of losing it, but because it already felt like something valuable. The gravel path curved gently along the shoreline. The waves rolled in with their familiar rhythm. Some were a little larger. Some hardly reached the sand at all. Yet each one arrived peacefully, and each one returned to the sea without leaving anything behind except a faint line upon the shore. Ethan smiled. Perhaps people were a little like waves. Each life touched the world in quiet ways, then continued onward. As he reached the harbor, he noticed that the old bench was empty once again. The sunlight rested warmly across its weathered boards. Without thinking, he walked toward it. He sat down. The familiar creak greeted him like an old friend. For a few moments, he simply watched the harbor. Fishing boats had already returned. Children laughed somewhere near the docks. A gull landed briefly on one of the wooden pilings before lifting effortlessly back into the sky. Then Ethan remembered the notebook. He removed it carefully from his pocket. The blue cloth cover felt soft beneath his fingertips. He opened to the first blank page. For a long moment, he didn't write, not because he had nothing to say, but because he wanted to notice first. The breeze, the sunlight, the smell of salt, the distant laughter, the steady breathing of the sea. Finally, he uncapped his fountain pen. In slow, careful handwriting, he wrote,
"This morning I learned that silence is never empty. It is quietly filled with waves, birds, wind, and the space to notice them all." He read the sentence once, then gently closed the notebook. It was enough. Grace had been right. One sentence was sometimes all a morning needed. The church bell rang softly across the town. 11 gentle chimes drifted over the rooftops. 11 o'clock. Ethan stood, slipped the notebook safely back into his pocket, and began wandering without any particular destination. That, he realized, was another unfamiliar pleasure. For most of his life, every walk had been towards somewhere. The workshop, the hardware store, a customer's home. Now, walking itself had become the destination. Harbor Street slowly gave way to Maple Avenue. Tall maple trees stretched above the sidewalks, their leaves filtering the sunlight into soft patches that danced across the ground. The air carried the scent of freshly cut grass. A gardener trimmed a hedge while softly whistling an old tune. Across the street, Mrs. Margaret sat on her porch, knitting a blue scarf. She looked up as Ethan passed. "Enjoying the morning?" "I am." "You'll enjoy the afternoon, too," she smiled. "They're different." Ethan laughed gently. "I'll look forward to discovering how." "You will." She returned to her knitting, counting her stitches quietly beneath her breath. A few minutes later, Ethan found himself standing before a familiar building, the town library. He had noticed it on his first evening. Now, in the bright morning light, it seemed even more inviting. Its red brick walls were partially covered with climbing ivy. White frame windows stood open, allowing the fresh sea breeze to drift gently inside. A wooden sign near the entrance read, "Seabrook Harbor Public Library. Welcome. Take your time." Ethan smiled. He had never seen a library encourage people to slow down quite so openly. He climbed the stone steps and quietly opened the door. The library greeted him with a peaceful stillness, not complete silence. Pages turned softly somewhere among the shelves. A chair creaked gently. The old grandfather clock in the reading room marked each passing second with a calm, steady rhythm. Tick, pause, tick. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, falling across rows of books that seemed to glow with quiet warmth. The scent of cedar shelves mixed with old paper and polished wood. It reminded Ethan of workshops. Both places, he thought, were built patiently. One shaped wood, the other shaped ideas. Behind the front desk sat a woman arranging returned books onto a small cart. She looked up and smiled. "You must be Ethan Brooks." He couldn't help laughing. "I was beginning to think my name appears on the town bulletin board." She laughed softly. "No, we simply notice." She stood and extended her hand. "I'm Eleanor Pierce, the librarian. It's nice to meet you." "And you." Eleanor gestured toward the reading room. "Please, feel free to wander. We don't organize books only by subject." Ethan looked curious. "No?" She smiled. "Some shelves are organized by feeling." He blinked. "Feeling?" She nodded. "Over there." She pointed toward a corner filled with comfortable chairs. "Those are books for rainy afternoons." She indicated another shelf near the windows. "Those are stories that feel like autumn." And beside the fireplace, books people often return to when they need comfort. Ethan smiled. "I've never seen a library quite like this." Eleanor's eyes twinkled. "We've never wanted to be." He wandered slowly through the shelves. Each section carried a small handwritten wooden sign. "Stories beside the sea, quiet journeys." gentle adventures, letters and memories, nature's seasons. There was no rush to choose. Every shelf seemed happy to wait. At the end of one aisle stood a large window overlooking the harbor. Beneath it rested a single rocking chair. Beside the chair was another small sign. It read, "Some books ask to be finished. Others simply ask you to sit with them for a while." Ethan smiled. Without thinking, he chose a slim book of nature essays and settled into the rocking chair. He read only a few pages. Not because the book wasn't interesting, but because every few minutes his eyes wandered toward the harbor outside. The waves, the gulls, the boats. Somehow, the view had become part of the story. After a little while, Eleanor approached carrying a small wooden box. "I almost forgot." She placed it gently on the table beside him. "We have a tradition." Ethan looked at the box curiously. "What kind of tradition?" She lifted the lid. Inside were dozens of handwritten bookmarks, each one made by someone from the town. Children, teachers, fishermen, artists, neighbors, visitors. "Whenever someone borrows a book for the first time," Eleanor said softly, "they choose a bookmark." Ethan reached inside. He didn't search for a particular one. He simply picked the first that rested beneath his fingers. It was made from pressed maple wood. On one side, someone had carefully painted a tiny lighthouse. On the other, a short sentence had been written in neat blue ink. "The best stories change their readers one quiet page at a time." Ethan traced the words with his thumb. He slipped the bookmark inside the little nature book, then smiled. Perhaps, he thought, the same could be said for mornings, and perhaps for small towns too. Outside the library window, a gentle breeze rippled across the harbor. Far in the distance, the lighthouse stood patiently beneath the bright blue sky. And somewhere, waiting at the end of the old wooden pier, the weathered bench continued facing the sea, ready for another quiet conversation before the day was done. Outside the library window, a gentle breeze rippled across the harbor. Far in the distance, the lighthouse stood patiently beneath the bright blue sky. And somewhere, waiting at the end of the old wooden pier, the weathered bench continued facing the sea, ready for another quiet conversation before the day was done. Ethan closed the little book of nature essays and carefully slid the maplewood bookmark between its pages. He carried the book back to the front desk. Eleanor looked up from a stack of returned novels and smiled. "Did you find something worth taking home?" Ethan nodded. "I think the book found me." Eleanor laughed softly. "That's usually how it happens." She stamped the inside cover with a small date stamp. The gentle thump echoed through the quiet library. As she handed the book back, she paused for a moment. "Before you go, we're gathering at the Harbor Garden this afternoon." Ethan tilted his head. "The Harbor Garden?" "It's a small community garden beside the harbor. Nothing formal. Neighbors simply meet there every Wednesday. Some water the flowers, some pull weeds, some bring lemonade, and some," she smiled, "mostly come for the conversation." Ethan smiled. "It sounds like the sort of place I'd enjoy." "I believe it is." The afternoon sun had climbed a little higher when Ethan stepped back onto Maple Avenue. The town felt brighter now. Children's laughter drifted from the school playground. A bicycle bell rang cheerfully somewhere nearby. Window boxes overflowed with colorful petunias and geraniums. Even the shadows beneath the maple trees seemed peaceful. He walked slowly toward home, stopping only long enough to place the borrowed book on the small table beside his favorite rocking chair. Then he filled a reusable glass bottle with cool water, placed his blue notebook into his jacket pocket, and set out once more. There was still much of the day waiting to be noticed. The harbor garden rested on a small piece of land between the pier and the old railway path that had long ago become a walking trail. A white wooden fence surrounded it, though the gate stood open, as if quietly reminding everyone that beauty was meant to be shared. Inside, narrow gravel paths wound between raised wooden garden beds. Each bed carried a small hand-painted sign. Wildflowers, herbs, tomatoes, lavender, sunflowers. At the center stood an old oak tree whose wide branches offered cool shade across a circle of weathered benches. A bird bath reflected the blue afternoon sky. Honeybees drifted lazily from flower to flower. Butterflies floated like tiny pieces of living color. Nothing in the garden appeared perfectly arranged, and somehow, that made it even more beautiful. Margaret was already there, wearing a wide straw hat and well-worn gardening gloves. She knelt beside a bed of lavender, gently trimming a few dried blossoms. When she noticed Ethan, her face brightened. "I had a feeling you'd come. I heard this is where people slow down." Margaret laughed. "Then you've certainly found the right place." Nearby, Samuel was repairing a small section of the garden fence. His toolbox rested beside him. Instead of replacing the entire board, he carefully sanded the worn edge before fitting it back into place. Ethan watched him for a moment. "You could have installed a new one." Samuel smiled without looking up. "I could have, but this board still has many good years left." He brushed away a little sawdust. "I've learned not to replace things that simply need a little care." Ethan quietly stored those words away. They seemed true of more than fences. A familiar voice called from across the garden. "Mr. Brooks!" Lily came running along one of the gravel paths. She slowed just before reaching him, remembering the basket of flower seedlings she was carrying.
"I've got something to show you." She carefully lifted one small clay pot. Inside grew a tiny blue lupine, no taller than her hand. "I planted it last month. It finally bloomed this morning." Ethan knelt beside her. The flower was delicate. Its tiny blue petals shimmered in the sunlight. "It's beautiful," Lily smiled proudly. "I named it Hope." Ethan looked at her. "That's a lovely name. My grandmother always said flowers should have names." Samuel overheard and smiled quietly. She certainly did. For the next hour, everyone found a small task. No one assigned jobs. No one gave instructions. People simply noticed what needed doing. Ethan helped fill a watering can from an old hand pump. Margaret tied climbing beans to a wooden trellis. Samuel repaired another loose fence rail. Lily carefully scattered wildflower seeds along the edge of the path. The work moved slowly, comfortably. Between conversations, there were long stretches of peaceful silence. No one hurried to fill them. The breeze seemed happy to do that instead. It rustled through the oak leaves overhead, carrying with it the scent of warm earth and blooming rosemary. As Ethan watered a row of young tomato plants, Margaret joined him. "You've worked with wood all your life." "I have. And now you're learning to work with gardens." He smiled. "They're not so different." Margaret looked interested. "How so?" Ethan rested the watering can on the ground. "Wood teaches patience. So do gardens. You can't force a tree to grow. You can't rush a flower to bloom. And you certainly can't hurry a tomato." Margaret laughed softly. "Very true." She looked around the garden. "I think that's one reason this place means so much to us. It reminds us that the best things happen in their own time." A little later, Daniel arrived from the bakery, carrying a woven basket covered with a blue and white cloth. "I brought refreshments." The cloth was lifted to reveal warm blueberry muffins, slices of lemon loaf, and a glass pitcher filled with homemade lemonade. The sweet scent drifted gently through the garden. Everyone gathered beneath the oak tree, not for a formal meal, just for a simple afternoon pause. Paper cups were filled, muffins were shared. Someone passed around fresh strawberries from a nearby farm. Lily broke one muffin into tiny pieces and placed a few crumbs beneath the bird bath. Within moments, a cheerful sparrow fluttered down. Then another. Soon, 3 little birds were enjoying the unexpected treat. Lily watched them with quiet delight. "They always know where kindness is." Samuel smiled. "I think people do, too." The afternoon drifted onward, like a slow-moving cloud. Sunlight filtered through the oak branches, creating shifting patterns across the grass. The church bell rang softly 4 times. Somewhere beyond the garden, a sailboat's bell chimed as it entered the harbor. Ethan reached into his jacket and removed the little blue notebook Grace had given him. He opened to a fresh page. This time, the words came more easily. He wrote, "Today I learned that a garden grows through small acts repeated with care. Perhaps a peaceful life grows the very same way." He closed the notebook with a gentle smile. Margaret noticed. "Writing again?" Ethan nodded. "Grace suggested I notice one beautiful thing each day." Margaret looked toward the flowers. "She's wise." Then she added quietly, "Just don't forget. Some beautiful things take more than one day to notice." Ethan looked around the harbor garden. Samuel sanding a fence rail. Lily laughing as butterflies circled the flowers. Daniel pouring another glass of lemonade. Neighbors chatting beneath the old oak tree. The breeze moving gently through the leaves. Perhaps Margaret was right. Some beauty revealed itself slowly, not in a single afternoon, but over many quiet days shared with familiar faces. As the shadows grew a little longer and the golden light of late afternoon settled across the garden, Ethan realized something he hadn't expected. Only a few days had passed since he arrived in Seabrook Harbor. Yet it no longer felt like a place he had moved to. It felt like a place that was gently making room for him. And as he looked toward the harbor beyond the garden fence, where the old lighthouse stood faithfully above the sea, he wondered what quiet lesson tomorrow might bring. And as he looked toward the harbor beyond the garden fence, where the old lighthouse stood faithfully above the sea, he wondered what quiet lesson tomorrow might bring. That evening, the answer arrived with the rain. The first drops were so gentle that they almost went unnoticed. One landed softly on the porch railing outside Ethan's cottage, then another. A few moments later, the roof began to sing its familiar song. Not loudly, not urgently, just a quiet rhythm of rain meeting cedar shingles. Tap, tap, tap. The sound blended with the distant whisper of the Atlantic, creating a peaceful harmony that seemed to wrap itself around the little town. Across Seabrook Harbor, porch lights glowed warmly behind rain-speckled windows. The lighthouse beam continued its slow circle through the mist, its light softened by the falling rain. The streets emptied early. Neighbors wished one another good evening before disappearing into cozy homes. The bakery closed its blue door. The library windows glowed softly for another hour before Eleanor turned the sign to closed. The harbor garden drank deeply from the gentle shower. Lavender bowed gracefully beneath tiny drops of water. The newly planted wildflower seeds rested quietly beneath the damp earth. Nature, Ethan thought, knew exactly what to do with a rainy evening. Inside the cottage, Ethan lit a small table lamp beside his favorite armchair. Its warm amber light filled the room without disturbing the peaceful darkness beyond the windows. He brewed a cup of chamomile tea. The kettle whistled softly before falling silent again. Wrapped in a comfortable wool sweater, he carried the steaming mug to the front porch. Most people might have stayed indoors, but Ethan had discovered something during his years of woodworking. Rain sounded different when heard beneath a roof while sitting outside. It became less like weather and more like music. He settled into the old porch swing. The wooden seat moved gently beneath him. Back and forth, back and forth. The rain continued its patient melody. Somewhere beyond the mist, a foghorn sounded once. Low, gentle, comforting. Its deep note drifted slowly across the harbor before fading into silence. Ethan smiled. Even the foghorn seemed unwilling to disturb the evening. He remained there for nearly an hour, not reading, not writing, simply listening. The rain struck the leaves of the maple tree in dozens of tiny rhythms. Water dripped steadily from the porch roof. A robin, tucked beneath the branches of a nearby pine tree, gave one final chirp before settling in for the night. The entire world seemed to be preparing for sleep. Eventually, Ethan finished the last sip of tea. He whispered a quiet good night to the rain, almost without realizing it. Then he stepped inside. The cottage welcomed him with familiar warmth. Outside, the rain continued, watching over the town until morning. When Ethan awoke the next day, the storm had already passed. The world felt wonderfully fresh. Tiny droplets still clung to every leaf and flower. The morning air carried the rich scent of wet cedar, damp earth, pine needles, and salt carried inland from the sea. Sunlight filtered gently through scattered clouds, making every raindrop sparkle like tiny pieces of glass. He opened the front door. The porch boards were still damp beneath his slippers. A small puddle reflected the pale blue sky. Somewhere nearby, a song sparrow greeted the morning with cheerful determination. The town seemed quieter than usual, not sleepy, refreshed, as though the rain had washed away everything unnecessary. Ethan brewed another cup of tea. Instead of taking it to the harbor, he returned to the porch swing. Today, it felt like the right place to stay. The blue notebook rested beside him. But when he reached for it, his hand paused. Something else had caught his attention. Inside the small writing desk near the window rested a box of stationery he had packed before leaving his old home. Cream-colored paper, matching envelopes, his favorite fountain pen. He smiled. It had been many months since he had written a letter. Real letters, he believed, moved at the same pace as meaningful thoughts. They couldn't be rushed. He carried the stationery onto the porch. For a long moment, he simply looked at the blank page. Then, in careful handwriting, he wrote, "Dear Michael." The name alone brought a warm smile to his face. Michael Carter had been Ethan's closest friend for nearly 40 years. They had first met as young apprentices in a furniture workshop, both eager to learn, both covered in sawdust by the end of every day. Through the years, they had built tables, rocking chairs, cabinets, church pews, and countless pieces of furniture side by side. They had shared early mornings, long afternoons, quiet lunches, and thousands of conversations that seemed ordinary at the time. Now, those ordinary conversations had become treasured memories. Ethan continued writing. "I hope this letter finds you well. You once told me that retirement would feel strange. You were right. But something unexpected has happened. Instead of feeling as though I've stopped working, I've begun learning again." He paused. The breeze gently stirred the edge of the paper. He looked toward the harbor. The lighthouse stood bright against the morning sky. The morning sky. Children's voices floated faintly from somewhere near the school. He smiled before writing again. "I've discovered a little town called Seabrook Harbor. The people here don't seem interested in rushing through life. Instead, they notice things. Fresh bread, the sound of gulls, the changing tide, the smell of rain. The quiet comfort of sitting beside someone without needing to speak. Ethan rested his pen. He realized something. He wasn't writing to impress Michael. He wasn't trying to tell an exciting story. He was simply sharing peace. And somehow, that felt enough. He continued. Do you remember the old walnut rocking chair we repaired together? The one with the cracked armrest? You told me something that afternoon I've never forgotten. You said, a careful repair often becomes stronger than the original piece. Ethan smiled gently. I think people are a little like that. Perhaps a retirement isn't the end of something. Perhaps it's simply a careful repair before the next chapter begins. The church bell rang softly across Seabrook Harbor. 9 peaceful chimes drifted through the fresh morning air. Ethan set his pen down for a moment. He watched 2 children in bright yellow rain boots splash happily through a tiny puddle across the street. Their grandmother laughed instead of stopping them. The puddle reflected the sky with every joyful step. He quietly added one final sentence. If you ever decide to travel east, there's an empty chair waiting for you on my porch and a bakery that serves the finest warm bread I've ever tasted. I think you'd feel at home here. He folded the letter carefully, slipped it into its envelope, wrote Michael's address in neat handwriting, then placed a small maple leaf, one that had dried perfectly between the pages of his notebook, inside the envelope before sealing it. Not as decoration, as a quiet reminder of this peaceful place. He would mail it later that afternoon. For now, it rested beside his teacup, waiting. Before returning inside, Ethan opened the blue notebook Grace had given him. On a fresh page, he wrote, Rain leaves the world cleaner than it found it. Perhaps kind words can do the aim for a heart. He closed the notebook. The porch swing continued its slow, comforting rhythm. Across the street, sunlight sparkled upon rain-washed maple leaves. The harbor breeze carried the scent of the ocean once more. And Ethan realized, some mornings asked us to explore, others asked us to remember. Both, in their own quiet way, led us gently home. Some mornings asked us to explore, others asked us to remember. Both, in their own quiet way, led us gently home. The rain had washed the world clean. When Saturday morning arrived, Seabrook Harbor seemed to glow with quiet freshness. The maple leaves shimmered beneath the early sunlight. Window boxes overflowed with flowers, still holding tiny drops of dew. The harbor reflected the pale blue sky so clearly that the fishing boats appeared to float between 2 worlds. The air smelled wonderfully alive. Salt from the Atlantic, freshly cut grass, warm cedar, and somewhere nearby, the unmistakable aroma of cinnamon rolls drifting from Harbor Hearth Bakery. Ethan stood on his porch for a few peaceful moments before leaving home. He had no schedule, no errands that couldn't wait. Only one gentle destination: the Saturday market by the sea. Samuel had mentioned it during their first conversation on the old wooden bench. It's not really about shopping, he had said with a smile. It's about seeing one another. Now Ethan was about to discover what he had meant. The market stretched along the harbor promenade, beginning near the bakery and continuing almost to the lighthouse path. White canvas tents stood in neat rows. Their fabric moved softly in the morning breeze. Colorful wooden signs hung above each table. No flashing lights, no loud announcements. Only cheerful conversations and the occasional sound of quiet laughter. Musicians played gentle acoustic melodies beneath a maple tree. Nothing demanded attention. Everything simply welcomed it. The first stall Ethan visited belonged to a local beekeeper. Small glass jars of golden honey caught the sunlight like liquid amber. Handwritten labels read, "Spring wildflower, honey blueberry blossom, honey coastal clover, honey." An elderly couple stood behind the table. The woman offered Ethan a tiny wooden spoon. "Would you like to taste?" He nodded gratefully. The honey was warm and floral, with a hint of sweetness that lingered gently. "It's wonderful," Ethan said. The beekeeper smiled. The bees did all the hard work. His wife laughed softly. "We simply gave them a good place to live." Ethan thought about that as he continued walking. Perhaps people weren't so different. Sometimes all they needed was a good place to belong. Farther along the promenade, baskets overflowed with freshly picked blueberries, strawberries, peaches, and crisp apples. Children helped their parents arrange bouquets of sunflowers and daisies. Someone sold handmade quilts stitched in soft coastal colors. Another table displayed smooth sea glass collected over many seasons. Each piece had been shaped patiently by the waves. None were identical, yet each one was quietly beautiful. Ethan picked up a small piece of pale green sea glass. Its edges were perfectly smooth. A handwritten note beside the basket read, "The ocean teaches sharp things how to become gentle." He smiled. The sentence reminded him of something Grace might have written in her journal. "Mr. Brooks." Lily's familiar voice floated through the crowd. She hurried toward him, though carefully enough not to spill the basket she carried. Inside were small wooden birds, each one hand-painted in bright natural colors. Bluebirds, robins, chickadees, cardinals. The little bluebird she had carved with Ethan sat proudly at the center. "I finished painting it yesterday." She lifted it carefully. The tiny pine bird seemed almost ready to fly. Its soft blue feathers had been painted with remarkable patience. Tiny black eyes looked toward the sea. "It's beautiful," Ethan said sincerely. Lily smiled. "I remembered what you told me." "What was that?" "To pay attention. So I painted one feather at a time." Ethan nodded. "And it shows." Samuel approached, carrying 2 cups of coffee. "I see our young artist has already found her first admirer." Lily giggled. "I've sold 3 birds already." "You have?" She nodded proudly. "And one little girl said mine looked happy." Samuel smiled. "I think that's because the person who made it was happy." Together they wandered farther through the market. Daniel stood outside a small tent decorated with woven baskets filled with warm bread. The scent drifted across half the harbor. He waved the moment he saw them. "I was wondering when you'd arrive." He handed each of them a small slice of freshly baked cinnamon bread. Market tradition. Lily accepted hers eagerly. Samuel laughed. "Everything around here seems to involve food." Daniel shrugged with a grin. "People talk longer when they're comfortable." He looked toward Ethan. "And bread has a way of making people stay." A little farther along, soft music drifted through the air. An older man sat beneath the shade of a maple tree playing an acoustic guitar. His melody was slow, gentle, familiar somehow, even though Ethan had never heard it before. Several children sat cross-legged on the grass, listening quietly. Nobody applauded between songs. There was no need. The music wasn't a performance. It was simply part of the morning, like the breeze, like the tide, like the laughter carried across the harbor. Grace stood near a small table covered with wildflowers gathered from the lighthouse garden. Tiny handwritten cards accompanied each bouquet. Instead of prices, they carried simple messages. For someone who needs encouragement. For a neighbor. For your own kitchen table. When Ethan approached, Grace smiled warmly. "I thought you might stop by." I couldn't resist. She handed him a small bundle of sea lavender tied with blue ribbon. "A gift? I can't accept that." "You can. It's from the lighthouse garden." Ethan breathed in its gentle fragrance. "Smells like the sea." Grace nodded. "It always does." Near the end of the market stood a long wooden table, unlike the others. It held no goods for sale, only blank postcards, pens, and a weathered wooden mailbox painted deep navy blue. A sign above it read, "Letters to tomorrow." Ethan looked curiously at Samuel. "What is this?" Samuel smiled. "It's one of our favorite traditions. Once each year, everyone writes a letter to themselves. Nothing complicated. Just a few thoughts. A hope. A memory. Something they don't want to forget. And then, the letters stay sealed for exactly 1 year. Next summer, they're returned unopened." Lily nodded enthusiastically. "I wrote one last year." "What did you write?" She smiled mischievously. "I don't remember." Samuel laughed. "That's the whole point." Ethan sat at the table. Before him rested a blank postcard. The harbor breeze stirred its edges. He picked up a fountain pen. For several quiet moments, he simply watched the sea. Then he began to write. "Dear future Ethan, if you're reading this, I hope you've continued noticing the small things. I hope you've kept meeting your friends on the old bench. I hope Lily is still carving birds. I hope the bakery still smells of fresh bread each morning. And I hope you've never become too busy to listen to the ocean." He paused, then added one final sentence. "If peace can be found anywhere, remember that you once found it here." He folded the postcard, placed it carefully inside an envelope, and slipped it into the blue mailbox. It landed with the softest sound, a tiny promise entrusted to time. The afternoon sun climbed gently overhead. The market continued its slow rhythm. Neighbors greeted neighbors. Children laughed. The guitarist began another quiet melody. A gentle breeze carried the scent of salt and wildflowers across the harbor. Ethan looked around at the smiling faces. No grand celebration was taking place. Nothing remarkable was happening. And yet, he had rarely experienced a morning that felt so complete. Perhaps Samuel had been right from the very beginning. The Saturday market wasn't really about buying things. It was about remembering that life became richer whenever people gathered. Not because they needed something, but because they enjoyed one another's company. As the church bell rang softly across Seabrook Harbor, Ethan reached into his jacket and opened the little blue notebook once again. On a fresh page, he wrote, "Today I learned that a community is built the same way a fine piece of furniture is built. One careful hand, one kind gesture, and one shared moment at a time." He closed the notebook gently. The harbor breeze turned a few pages before letting them rest again. Ahead, the old wooden bench waited patiently beside the sea. And without anyone saying a word, Ethan, Samuel, Lily, Grace, and Daniel all found themselves walking toward it together. Some traditions begin so quietly that no one notices them becoming traditions at all. Some traditions begin so quietly that no one notices them becoming traditions at all. The Saturday market slowly began to wind down. Not because anyone was in a hurry to leave, simply because the afternoon was gently giving way to evening. The white canvas tents were folded one by one. Wooden tables were carried back into nearby shops. Flower sellers gathered the last of their bouquets. The musician beneath the maple tree played one final peaceful melody before placing his guitar carefully inside its worn leather case. The harbor remained calm. The tide had begun its slow return toward the shore. Above the water, the sky gradually softened from bright blue into gentle shades of gold. The day was changing its pace once again. Samuel adjusted the brim of his old canvas hat and looked toward Ethan. "Have you ever visited Driftwood Beach?" Ethan shook his head. "Not yet." Samuel smiled. "Then tonight seems like the perfect evening." Lily clapped her hands softly. "It's bonfire night." Daniel laughed. "You've been waiting all week." "I know." Grace joined them, carrying a small woven basket. Inside were neatly folded wool blankets. "The evening breeze will be cooler by the water," she said. "I thought we might need these." Ethan smiled. "You all seem to prepare for everything." Grace looked toward the sea. "Not everything. Only the things worth sharing." The walk to Driftwood Beach took nearly 20 minutes. A narrow coastal path wound gently through low, grassy dunes. Beach roses bloomed beside the trail, their soft pink petals moving with the breeze. Tall sea oats whispered quietly against one another. Every few minutes, the Atlantic appeared between the dunes, sparkling beneath the lowering sun. Lily walked a little ahead, carefully balancing a small basket. Inside rested her little bluebird carving. Ethan noticed. "You brought it again?" She nodded. "I think it likes sunsets." Samuel smiled. "Who are we to argue with a bird?" As they rounded the final bend, Driftwood Beach came into view. It was quieter than the harbor. Long stretches of smooth sand curved gently along the shoreline. Weathered pieces of driftwood rested above the high tide line, shaped by years of waves and wind. Some looked like sculptures. Others resembled old trees reaching toward the sea. Beyond them, the Atlantic stretched endlessly toward the horizon. The setting sun rested low above the water, filling the entire sky with warm amber light. Small groups of neighbors were already gathering. Not many. Perhaps 30 people altogether. Just enough to feel like company. Never enough to disturb the quiet. Near the center of the beach, a carefully prepared bonfire waited inside a wide circle of smooth stones. Several volunteers stacked dry driftwood with practiced hands. No one rushed. Lighting the fire, Samuel explained, was never hurried. It deserves patience. As the first match touched the dry cedar kindling, a tiny flame appeared. It flickered gently, almost shyly. Then another piece of wood caught. Soon the small fire settled into a calm, steady glow. It did not roar. It simply breathed. Soft crackles drifted into the evening air. Tiny sparks floated upward before disappearing among the deepening colors of the sky. Everyone arranged themselves naturally around the fire. Blankets were spread across the sand. Children sat close to their parents. A few older neighbors chose driftwood logs instead. Ethan found himself beside Samuel once again. Lily curled up on her blanket, placing the little bluebird beside her. Daniel opened a woven basket filled with warm rolls that still carried the comforting aroma of fresh bread. He passed them quietly from person to person. Grace poured hot apple cider into simple enamel mugs. The sweet fragrance mixed with the scent of cedar smoke and salty sea air. It was a smell Ethan knew he would never forget. For a while, nobody told stories. Nobody sang. Everyone simply watched the fire. The waves rolled gently toward the shore, one after another. Their rhythm never changed. The fire answered with its own quiet music. Crackle. Pause. Crackle. Above them, the first evening stars began appearing one by one. The lighthouse far across the harbor awakened once more. Its familiar beam swept patiently across the darkening sea. Light. Then darkness. Then light again. It felt wonderfully reassuring. After some time, Samuel reached beside him and picked up a smooth piece of driftwood. He turned it thoughtfully in his hands. My father loved these. Ethan looked at the weathered wood. They're beautiful. Samuel nodded. He used to say, "The ocean never wastes anything. It simply gives everything a new shape." Ethan ran his fingers gently across the polished surface. Years of waves had rounded every sharp edge. The wood had become smoother than anything a workshop could produce. Nature had worked patiently, without tools, without hurry, only with time. Lily looked up at her grandfather. "Did your father bring you here?" Samuel smiled. "Every summer." "What did you do?" He looked toward the sea. "We watched the sunset." "And?" "We listened." "To what?" Samuel laughed softly. Whatever the evening wanted to say. Lily thought carefully. "I think tonight it's saying..." She closed her eyes for a moment. "Slow down." Samuel looked toward Ethan. "I believe she's right." The fire glowed a little brighter as darkness settled over the beach. Its warm light reflected gently in everyone's eyes. No one reached for a phone. No one checked the time. There was nowhere else anyone wished to be. The moment itself felt complete. Daniel quietly handed Ethan another cup of warm cider. "How are you settling in?" Ethan smiled. "Better than I ever imagined." Daniel nodded. "I thought you might. You seem to fit this town." Ethan looked toward the waves. "For a long time, I believed retirement meant letting go of the work I loved." He paused. "Now, I think it simply made room for different work." Samuel looked at him. "What kind?" Ethan smiled gently. "Learning. Teaching. Listening. Noticing." Grace warmed her hands around her mug. "Sometimes, those are the most important kinds." A gentle silence followed. Not empty, comfortable. The sort of silence shared only by people who trust one another. The fire settled into glowing embers. Children leaned sleepily against their parents. The tide continued its endless conversation with the shore. Overhead, the stars multiplied until the entire sky shimmered softly. The Milky Way stretched faintly above the Atlantic, like a pale ribbon of light. Lily pointed upward. "There are so many." Grace smiled. "My grandmother used to say, you don't have to count the stars to enjoy them. You simply have to look up." Ethan followed her gaze. He realized that the same was true of many things. Kindness, friendship, peace. Their value could never be measured, only experienced. After a while, Samuel stood. He walked slowly to the edge of the water. Ethan joined him. Together they watched a small wave wash gently across the sand, before quietly slipping back into the sea. Samuel spoke without looking away from the horizon. "You know, I've lived here all my life, and every now and then, I still discover something new." Ethan smiled. "I hope I never stop discovering." Samuel nodded. "I don't think you will." They remained there in peaceful silence. Behind them, the fire continued glowing warmly. Ahead, the lighthouse faithfully guided unseen boats through the darkness. Between the two, the ocean breathed in its slow, timeless rhythm. Ethan closed his eyes for just a moment. He listened. To the waves, to the breeze, to the distant cry of a lone gull settling for the night, to the quiet laughter drifting from the bonfire. And somewhere deep inside himself, he noticed another sound, a calmness he had not felt in many years. Not excitement, not relief, something quieter, contentment. It had arrived so gently, he almost hadn't noticed it. As the evening drew peacefully toward its end, everyone helped gather the blankets and carefully ensured the fire had burned down safely. No one hurried home. They simply walked together beneath the starlit sky, their footsteps leaving soft impressions in the sand before the tide gently erased them. Some paths, Ethan thought, were never meant to last forever. They existed only long enough to remind us that we had once walked there together. When they reached the top of the dunes, Ethan turned for one last look. The beach lay quiet beneath the stars. The last glowing embers shimmered faintly. Far beyond, the lighthouse continued its patient watch. And the ocean still whispered the same gentle story it had been telling for countless generations. A story of tides, of time, of home. The ocean still whispered the same gentle story it had been telling for countless generations. A story of tides, of time, of home. The days continued quietly. One morning became another, then another after that. No single day felt extraordinary, and perhaps that was exactly what made them so precious. Life in Seabrook Harbor was never measured by dramatic moments. It was measured by gentle routines, the kind that slowly settled into the heart until they became as familiar as breathing. Every morning, Ethan walked to the harbor. Every Thursday, Samuel waited on the old wooden bench with 2 cups of coffee. Every Friday afternoon, Lily arrived at the Walker workshop, eager to learn another small woodworking lesson. Every Saturday, Daniel experimented with a new loaf of bread and always insisted that Ethan be the first to taste it. And whenever Ethan passed the lighthouse, Grace could usually be found tending the wildflowers or adding another thoughtful sentence to the old journal. Without realizing it, Ethan had become part of those routines, and they had quietly become part of him. Summer lingered for a while longer. The afternoons remained warm. The harbor shimmered beneath bright blue skies. Children still jumped from the old dock into the cool Atlantic waters, their laughter drifting across the bay. The gardens overflowed with tomatoes, basil, beans, and bright yellow sunflowers. The air carried the sweet fragrance of roses and sea salt. Everything seemed content to remain exactly as it was. Yet, nature had already begun whispering about the season to come. Not loudly, just enough for those who had learned how to notice. One morning, Ethan stepped onto his porch, carrying his usual mug of coffee. He paused. Something felt different. Not colder, not exactly. The breeze carried a new freshness, a gentle crispness that hadn't been there the week before. He smiled. The first autumn breeze. He spoke the words quietly to himself, as though greeting an old friend. Above him, a few maple leaves had begun changing from deep green to soft shades of amber. Only a handful. Most of the tree remained unchanged, but the season had begun its slow conversation, one leaf at a time. On his walk toward the harbor, Ethan noticed even more small changes. The sunrise arrived a little later than before. The shadows stretched longer across Harbor Street. Wild geese flew high overhead in a graceful V-shaped formation. their calls echoing softly across the morning sky. Mrs. Margaret had replaced the bright summer flowers on her porch with pots of orange chrysanthemums. When she noticed Ethan watching them, she smiled. They'll last well into autumn. They're beautiful. She gently brushed one blossom with her fingertips. Every season deserves its own welcome. Ethan nodded. I think I'm beginning to understand that. The harbour garden had changed too. The tomato vines bowed beneath the weight of ripe fruit. The lavender had faded into soft silver. Sunflowers, once standing proudly toward the sky, now lowered their heavy heads as if quietly preparing for rest. Lily knelt beside the flower bed where she had planted the tiny blue lupine months earlier. It had finished blooming. Its petals had long since drifted away. Only green leaves remained. She looked up at Ethan. Did it die? He knelt beside her. No. It simply finished one chapter. She looked uncertain. Will it come back? If we care for it through the winter, he smiled. It will surprise us again in spring. Lily looked thoughtfully at the little plant. So, it's resting? Ethan nodded. Just like the garden. She smiled. I like that. That afternoon, Ethan and Samuel worked together in the workshop. Not on birdhouses, not on furniture. They were building a simple wooden bench for the harbour garden. The design wasn't complicated. Strong oak legs, a smooth maple seat, rounded edges that would feel welcoming beneath tired hands. As Ethan guided the hand plane across the wood, long, delicate curls gathered on the workshop floor. Samuel watched them drift gently downward. My father loved this sound. The plane? Samuel nodded. He used to say, a sharp blade never shouts, it whispers. Ethan smiled. So does good craftsmanship. Neither man hurried. They measured twice, cut once, paused often. Not because they were tired, but because beautiful work deserved moments of quiet attention. Outside the open workshop door, the breeze carried the scent of fallen leaves for the very first time that year. Several days later, Grace invited Ethan to the lighthouse for tea. She was standing beside the old journal when he arrived. Without saying a word, she opened it to a fresh page. What did you notice today? She asked. Ethan thought for a moment, then answered. I noticed that the harbour sounds different in autumn. Grace looked interested. How so? He smiled softly. In summer, I hear laughter first. Now, I hear the wind. Grace nodded. As the seasons change, they each find their own voice. She dipped her pen into a small bottle of blue ink and wrote carefully across the page. Then she turned the journal toward Ethan. He read the newest entry. The first autumn breeze arrived this morning. No one announced it. The maple trees simply nodded in agreement. Ethan laughed quietly. I wish I could write like that. Grace closed the journal gently. You already do. You simply don't know it yet. That evening, Ethan returned home a little earlier than usual. The sunset arrived sooner now. Golden light spilled across the harbour, turning the water into flowing copper. The lighthouse awakened just before dusk. Its familiar beam swept slowly across the sea. The old bench at the end of the pier waited patiently, as always. Ethan sat there alone for a while. Not because he felt lonely, because the bench had become another friend. He reached into his jacket and removed the little blue notebook. Its pages had begun filling with observations, short thoughts, small discoveries, gentle reminders. He turned to a fresh page. After watching a single maple leaf drift slowly onto the quiet water, he wrote, Autumn never hurries summer away. It simply arrives so gently that one morning you realize the world has learned a new song. He closed the notebook. The words felt complete. As twilight settled across Seabrook Harbor, Daniel walked quietly onto the pier, carrying 2 steaming cups of coffee. He smiled when he saw Ethan. "I thought you might be here." "You know me well." Daniel handed him one of the mugs. For a while, they simply watched the harbor together. Finally, Daniel spoke. "Do you know what I love most about autumn?" Ethan shook his head. "It reminds us that letting go can also be beautiful." Ethan looked toward the maple trees lining Harbor Street. A single golden leaf floated gently through the evening air. It landed softly beside the old bench. Neither man reached to move it. Some things were already exactly where they belonged. Above them, the first stars appeared. The lighthouse continued its slow and faithful circle. The tide rose quietly beneath the pier. And somewhere beyond the darkening horizon, another season was making its peaceful way towards Seabrook Harbor. Above them, the first stars appeared. The lighthouse continued its slow and faithful circle. The tide rose quietly beneath the pier, and somewhere beyond the darkening horizon, another season was making its peaceful way toward Seabrook Harbor. The weeks that followed unfolded as gently as the turning pages of a well-loved book. The mornings grew cooler. The evenings arrived a little earlier. The maple trees that lined Harbor Street slowly exchanged their summer green for warm shades of amber, crimson, and gold. Every sunrise looked slightly different. Every sunset carried its own quiet beauty, and Ethan noticed them all, not because he was trying to, because noticing had quietly above them, the first stars appeared. The lighthouse continued its slow and faithful circle. The tide rose quietly beneath the pier, and somewhere beyond the darkening horizon, another season was making its peaceful way toward Seabrook Harbor. The weeks passed as gently as the tides. No one in Seabrook Harbor seemed to measure time by calendars alone. Instead, they measured it by the first cool morning breeze, by the last sunflower standing in the harbor garden, by the sound of geese flying south, by the changing colors of the maple trees along Harbor Street. Without anyone saying it aloud, autumn had quietly become part of everyday life, and so had Ethan. One crisp Saturday morning, Samuel knocked softly on Ethan's front door. When Ethan opened it, Samuel was already smiling. "I think today is the day." Ethan looked curious. "The bench?" Samuel nodded. "The harbor garden is ready." Together they walked through the peaceful streets, carrying the final pieces they had carefully crafted over many afternoons in the workshop. The oak legs had been sanded until they felt as smooth as river stones. The maple seat reflected the warm colors of autumn. There were no fancy carvings, no elaborate decorations, only quiet craftsmanship, the kind that never demanded attention, yet somehow always earned it. When they reached the harbor garden, several familiar faces were already waiting. Margaret was arranging chrysanthemums around the entrance. Daniel carried a basket filled with warm cinnamon bread, fresh from the bakery. Grace arrived with a small bouquet of lighthouse wildflowers. Lily stood proudly beside a wooden cloth covering something carefully hidden. The garden looked beautiful. The tomatoes had been harvested. Pumpkins rested beside the pathways. Golden leaves gathered beneath the old oak tree. Everything seemed ready. Samuel placed one hand gently on the finished bench. "This should last many years." Ethan smiled. "If people take care of it?" Samuel looked around at the neighbors gathering nearby. "I think they will." Together, they lifted the bench into its place beneath the wide branches of the old oak tree. The feet settled firmly upon the ground. It fit perfectly, as though it had always belonged there. Everyone stepped back. No speeches were made. No ribbon was cut. The neighbors simply admired it for a quiet moment. Sometimes that was enough. Then Lily stepped forward. "I have something too." She carefully removed the cloth from the object she had been protecting. Beneath it stood a small wooden birdhouse. Unlike her very first bluebird carving, this one was larger, more confident. The roof fit perfectly. The entrance hole was smooth and neatly rounded. Tiny hand-painted bluebirds decorated one side. She looked up at Ethan. "I made almost all of it myself." Ethan examined it carefully. He noticed the careful joints, the smooth edges, the patience inside every detail. Then he smiled. "It isn't almost. You did make it yourself." Lily's eyes grew bright. "Really?" He nodded. "I only showed you where to begin. You built the rest." Samuel quietly rested his hand upon Ethan's shoulder. Without saying anything, the two men shared the quiet satisfaction every teacher feels when a student no longer needs quite as much guidance. The birdhouse was gently fastened to a sturdy maple tree near the garden entrance. Almost immediately, a curious chickadee landed on a nearby branch. Everyone laughed softly. Daniel grinned. "I think you've already got your first visitor." Lily whispered almost to herself. "I hope it likes living here." Grace smiled. "I have a feeling it will." Later that afternoon, Grace invited everyone to the lighthouse for warm tea. The familiar room welcomed them with soft sunlight, filtering through the tall windows. The old leather-bound journal rested upon its wooden desk. Grace opened it carefully. She turned several pages before stopping near the end. "This page," she said quietly, "has been waiting." She dipped her fountain pen into blue ink, then wrote slowly. Everyone remained silent. Only the gentle scratching of the pen could be heard. When she finished, she turned the journal toward Ethan. He read the words. "This year, the harbor welcomed a man who arrived carrying many years of careful work in his hands. He taught a child to carve wood. He helped build a bench where strangers would become friends. He reminded us that patience is something we can share. Some people move into a town. Others quietly become part of its story. Ethan Brooks has become part of ours." For a long moment, Ethan couldn't speak. Not because he was sad, because gratitude often arrives too quietly for immediate words. Finally, he smiled. "I don't know what to say." Grace closed the journal gently. "You don't have to." As evening approached, everyone naturally found themselves walking toward the harbor. No one suggested it. No one planned it. Some traditions simply knew where to lead people. The old wooden bench at the end of the pier waited exactly where it always had. This time, it was just large enough for everyone. Samuel, Grace, Daniel, Margaret, Lily, and Ethan. They sat together as the sun slowly lowered toward the Atlantic. The lighthouse prepared for another night's watch. Fishing boats returned one by one. A gentle breeze carried the familiar scents of salt, cedar, fresh bread, and autumn leaves. Everything Ethan had come to love about Seabrook Harbor seemed to gather into this single peaceful evening. Lily rested her little bluebird carving beside her. It had traveled with her through so many chapters. She picked it up and handed it to Ethan. "I think you should keep it." He looked surprised. "But you made it." She nodded. "I know. But every time you look at it, you'll remember that I learned because you were patient." Ethan accepted it carefully. The little bird felt warm from Lily's hands. He turned it over gently. The tiny imperfections were still there, exactly as they had been on the day she carved it. And they were still beautiful, perhaps even more beautiful now, because they carried a story. The sun finally touched the horizon. Golden light spread across the calm Atlantic like liquid amber. The lighthouse beam awakened. Its familiar light swept gracefully across the sea, across the harbor, across the weathered wooden pier, and finally, across the faces of the friends sitting quietly together. No one spoke. There was nothing left that needed saying. The waves whispered softly below. The gulls returned to their nests. Stars slowly appeared above the peaceful town. Ethan looked toward the endless ocean. Months earlier, he had arrived believing he was searching for a quieter place to live. Now he understood something different. He hadn't been searching for a place. He had been searching for a rhythm, a way of living that allowed him to notice, to listen, to breathe, to belong. And somewhere between the old bench, the lighthouse, the workshop, the harbor garden, the library, the bakery, the Saturday market, the rainy mornings, the autumn breeze, and the gentle kindness of ordinary people, he had quietly found it. He was no longer the new neighbor. He was no longer simply visiting. Seabrook Harbor had become home. Long after darkness settled over the Atlantic, the ocean continued its endless conversation with the shore, wave after wave, slowly, patiently, without ever growing tired, just as it had done yesterday, just as it would tomorrow. And if, someday in the future, another traveler happened to arrive in that little harbor searching for peace, perhaps they would notice an old wooden bench waiting at the end of the pier. Perhaps an elderly craftsman named Ethan would be sitting there with 2 warm cups of coffee, one for himself, and one for whoever needed a quiet place to rest for a while. Because that is how kindness continues, not with great announcements, but with small moments, repeated gently, until they become part of someone's life. The lighthouse kept watch. The harbor slept peacefully. The stars shimmered above the Atlantic, and the ocean still whispered its timeless story. A story of patience, a story of friendship, a story of home. Good night.